My name is Brian Wish. I'm an entrepreneur, CEO, and pathfinder. If I've learned anything in life, it's that self-discovery is a critical part of living intentionally, building meaningful relationships, and achieving the future we see for ourselves. In July of 2021, I sold all my possessions, headed west, and began a quest to live a fuller and more meaningful life. The experience helped me truly understand the power of a single moment. And through my conversations with leaders from all walks of life, I've seen how that one phone call, heartbreak, diagnosis, or lost job can transform the entire course of our lives. In this podcast, I sit down with entrepreneurs, influencers, and experts across industries to talk through the events that changed everything. Together, we'll relive the make or break decisions, hard conversations, periods of despair and hope, chance encounters, and everything that followed. Jess Yuen is an advisor and executive coach who specializes in supporting first-time founders and executives. She is a 3-time startup executive who has experienced the ups and downs of 10x growth across different industries. Her career has seen her take on a variety of roles, serving as Chief People Officer, Chief of Staff to the CEO, and Head of International Growth and Strategy. Throughout those journeys, Jess was a fundamental force behind defining and cultivating distinctive, iconic cultures that enabled greater business impact. As a former management consultant at McKinsey, product manager at Yahoo, and Stanford-educated engineer, Jess is grounded in first principles and systems thinking for business transformation. In addition to her work, Jess enjoys corny jokes, playing violin for community theater, devouring must-read books, indulging ice cream, and hugging her kids. In this episode of The One Away Show, Jess takes us back to a defining moment in her childhood that set her off on a different course and even possibly influenced her career path today. Jess, welcome to The One Away Show.
Thanks, Brian. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. So Jess, what is the one away moment that you want to share with us today?
Yes, and I'm just so excited that this is the topic for the podcast because I really believe life is just a series of one-away moments kind of all strung together, and I've had many in my life. And I kind of went far back for this one, way into my past where I felt like it sort of put me on a different life trajectory. And it goes back to kindergarten. Even actually precursor to kindergarten, I was taking an entrance exam for kindergarten, and I just bombed it, the whole thing. I just tears, ended up in failing, and I got held back a year in school because of it. And the irony of it all is actually a couple of things. One, one of the assignments for this entrance exam was to draw a person. And I got so immersed in all the details of the face and the eyebrows and like all the features that I forgot the big picture of what I was supposed to be doing. And when I asked the facilitator, hey, what was I supposed to be doing again? Because I kind of forgot. They said, nope, I can't tell you that, that kind of ruins the exam. And when I heard the news that they weren't going to help me out, I started crying. And so then I got dinged for not having a big picture view. And then I got dinged again for having low social emotional intelligence. I was just not emotionally mature enough to enter kindergarten at that point. And so now as an executive coach, it's really ironic because that's one thing I do on a day-to-day basis is help people to see things from a different perspective and that higher level thinking. And then also it's required for me to be a much more emotionally intelligent person. But I feel like with kindergarten shifting my course, I got held back a year. Through my childhood, I often thought about, if I had actually passed that exam, the different students I'd be interacting with, the different teachers I might have had, and how so much of my day-to-day would have been just a very different experience for me.
First, I've never heard of a kindergarten entrance exam. I'm sorry, I questioned what kind of school you were starting out at. I think, we have
Yeah, it was a private school that I ended up only attending for kindergarten, and then I was put into public school for the rest of my first through 12th grade schooling.
Maybe the face just wasn't good enough to let you in, it didn't even matter. Too much detail on the face and it still wasn't enough. No. Jess, I personally don't remember a lot of childhood. Maybe that's just my how I grew up, but it seems like those are very vivid and distinct memories, or a very distinct memory that you had at a pretty young age. I'm just curious, what it might have held you back a year. What do you think that year though potentially enabled for you by like maybe having to wait? Because you hear stories all the time about positive things that happen from this. I'm curious for you as you kind of look at where you are today, which we can go into a bit later, but I'm just curious what has happened because of that in a positive
Yeah.
way.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a few things in particular. One, an extra year of childhood, honestly, right? Like I had an extra year to not need to study as much and just be a kid who was playing and drawing and doing all the things. And an extra year to actually emotionally mature. I do think that it was real feedback that um, I I didn't at the time realize that was what was happening, but it was additional time for that as well. And I think it played out in my childhood too, that being one of the older kids in the classroom, um, it gave me more confidence. It helped me to be more assured of myself. And I think I did grow up as a rather reserved and shy personality. And so it allowed me time to blossom more from that as well.
What was childhood like for you? What how were you raised and kind of what was like your experience growing up?
Yeah, so I had a really positive childhood overall. I'm the child of immigrant parents, so my parents came over from they were born in mainland China and grew up in Hong Kong and then came over to the States for college and made their way in Silicon Valley in the Bay Area. And so I had a lovely middle class upbringing, but with that bent that immigrants have. You know, we clipped coupons and we watched our pennies, and we were very mindful of the kind of financial sustainability and longevity here. Um, I was a huge bookworm and nerd as a kid. I spent hours at the library checking out the maximum number of books that you could and just reading all that I could. I loved board games. It was one of those things that I would spend hours just like playing against myself. I have an older sister who's amazing and wonderful, but um she was 4 years older than me and so wasn't as interested at the same exact times as I was on certain pieces. And so I would just like have nobody to play a board game with. So I'd sit at home and I'd like play checkers or something and play both sides of it. So I was pretty self-entertaining, my mom would say. Like I could be kind of do my own thing for a good amount of time. And I tended to have a pretty close circle of friends throughout my childhood as well. So I was fortunate. I grew up in around the Bay Area and technology, and have been exposed to kind of this world for quite a while, but not at the level that I have now, where I'm working with startups and oftentimes the founders at the early stages of companies, whereas my parents were, employees within much larger tech organizations.
I can sense the independence. It's nice that you were given the independence at a young age to maybe self-explore what you like to do on your own. But I can totally see how, with the career that you're in today, which we can talk more about, the independence kind of on your own to explore with the people you work with by yourself. So very cool. Yeah, I'd love to understand the progression, career professional level. You talked about growing up in this area and the technological influences of the Bay Area. How are you thinking about, as you moved into, let's just say, high school and things, kind of what was your thought progression in life around who you were, what you wanted to be, and kind of where things were going for you?
Yeah, I love that question because I think the big shift was thinking about what other people expected or wanted versus how much was being driven by myself. And even in high school, I think that many Asian immigrant children, there's a joke like you could choose from being a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, and that was sort of like the expanse of options that were in front of you. And I would say that was similar to what I was encouraged to follow. And so I sort of having trouble with words because I'm even thinking back to high school biology and realizing like I can't be a doctor because I can't do this dissection thing.
Mm.
Being a lawyer didn't sound that appealing. And so I was like, I guess I'll be an engineer. And so I kind of got pulled into this path, and I was very, very fortunate when I applied to college that I actually was given a merit scholarship to UC San Diego under the Jacob Scholar program. And the one caveat to it was that you had to stay an engineering major. And I had applied under engineering under this, like, okay, I guess of these three options, I'll put engineering down as my major. But under the understanding for my parents that, like, if you hate engineering, you can always leave. But then because I was on this merit scholarship, I got into my freshman year and I was like, these classes are hard. Like, it's a lot harder than high school. And I'd gotten straight A's in high school. And so getting to college and being like, how's everybody else doing this? Because I thought, I was pretty good and clearly struggling. But I kept with it in large part motivated because I had the scholarship that was enabling a whole different kind of view on how I was able to approach my college studies. And so as I got through college, I was having this moment of like, is this what I want to do? Am I actually really good at it? As opposed to, do I really like it? And I think that distinction hadn't ever been clear to me in high school because I was getting straight A's. And so it was sort of like, I don't know if I like it or not. I'm just doing it. And so over time, I think through my career, the thing I've been exploring a lot more is, what do I actually like? And how much is it related to how good I am at it versus I truly just like enjoy it and the process is part of what I love. And so from engineering, I meandered my way over to management consulting, which is a whole one-way story in and of itself. And then into product management, and then into the startup worlds that took me into kind of the road that I have continued since. But I think the exploration for a big part is I wanted for a long time to find something I was like super passionate about. And engineering, I knew I loved certain parts of it, but I knew it wasn't like my passion. And so I was trying to figure out, how do I find that thing? And eventually what I reconciled for myself is I didn't have it like some people. Some people are just like born with this like known thing. And for me, what I realized is I really liked following my curiosity and finding a problem or some piece of a puzzle that I could just sort of get my arms around for a couple years at a time. And I ended up pursuing my career in that way of following my curiosity, following a problem, and then being able to kind of weave my path through that. And it's, when you look at my LinkedIn, it sort of looks very all over the place. And my dad, who hilariously, when he discovered LinkedIn a few years ago, he was like, I observed, like, I looked at your sister's profile and then I looked at yours. And for hers, I get it. Like, she studied accounting. She went to Big Four, got an accounting job. And then she went to big companies and did accounting. And then she went to smaller companies. Like, there's a thread. And then I look at yours and it's sort of like engineering, management consulting, product, startup land, do all the things in startup land, and start your own business. And even then, there's been kind of an evolution there before I have come to executive coaching. And so the breadth of that meandering, I think sometimes he's like, how did you get there?
Yeah, you said something about having that, like, knowing that, to your dad's, well, like, yeah, that knowing that maybe engineering wasn't right. You had this innate curiosity that you like to follow. Was there pressures from anywhere to kind of stick to that path of engineering, or was it you kind of feel the freedom to shift to something? And how did you know once you shifted, away from it, that it was the right thing to be shifting towards?
What a good question, because I think that was one of the trickiest things for me to figure out what to shift towards. And in the absence of knowing that answer, I was encouraged in a very practical way from my parents to continue down the engineering path. And so that was how I ended up in a PhD program for electrical engineering. And while in my master's program, I mean, this is the like a great example of another one-away moment. During my master's program, I had a friend who had wanted to go to a job career recruitment meeting for a company in management consulting. And she's like, will you come with me? And it was all geared towards why engineers make great management consultants. And mind you, this is like an industry I've never heard of. I have no familiarity with what they do. But what I loved about it is they said, hey, engineers know how to handle like this part of the problem. And what resonated so deeply and was part of like what pulled to that curiosity thread was they said, as a management consultant, you look at the big picture and you be able to see these pieces and how they fit all together. And so it's funny that we were talking about my childhood, because I'm like, I loved puzzles and I loved putting things together. And I I had this moment in kindergarten where I was looking at this one little bit and I couldn't see the whole big thing. And it was like something inside me said, this sounds really interesting, like go look into this and figure out, like, is this something that you could do? And so from there, I started preparing for the case interviews and eventually was able to get an offer. And there's like more steps in between than that. That makes it sound very straightforward. But it ended up working out, and I was able to leap because there was this promise of having some impact, being able to learn, doing something really different. And I had wanted to try something different. I just didn't know the paths to be able to get there. And this seemed to kind of allow me to kind of take a leap, and go try it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I like how you reflected back childhood, putting things together as a kid, and then kind of the feeling that pull management consultant of how do you kind of look at things individually and kind of piece problems together in that way, and knowing that, hey, this is something a little more exciting here that was a bit aligned to yourself for sure.
Yeah.
On the management consulting side, would you reflect on that? Were there any one or two assignments or kind of client relationships that you look at that were transformative to you, that you look back and you say, I learned the biggest lesson from those two accounts, and those like stick with me to this day?
Yeah. I mean, I think so much of the management consultant experience is drinking through a fire hose. And, nowadays, management consulting sort of has this interesting duality of being still very prestigious, but at the same time having been through some tricky situations. But at the time I was there, it was still sort of like, oh my gosh, management consulting, it's sort of the learning ground and the place to kind of read future CEOs and executives. And I think the two incidences maybe, because there's just so many. There was one moment in my first year as a management consultant, and my manager was giving me feedback. They're really big on feedback culture and being really direct. And they essentially said to me, you're great, you do really good work, but people have to be super close to you in order to figure that out. Because I was extremely quiet. I wasn't expressive of what I was thinking. Everything was stuck in my, so to speak, left-hand column, right? It was like stuff that I was sort of thinking and observing and scribbling on the margins, but I wasn't actually explicitly saying it without having to be prompted. And they had encouraged me to every day, whether I had to do it for a client or even just for myself, like practice taking the thoughts in my head and putting it down into the kind of currency for management consultants is slides. So they were saying, hey, write like 3 slides a day to practice just getting the thoughts out of your head and out articulated, and build that muscle. And I would say that was one of the most powerful moments for me, because they're like, you could be the greatest management consultant, but if you're not saying anything, you're worthless, right? Like you're of no value if all of this stuff stays in your head. And that was one of the first moments in my life that I felt like I really had to push myself in building a skill and a muscle that was not natural for me, and it wasn't that comfortable for me. And I had done it a couple times in my childhood, and like taking a class in speech, and I had done speech and debate and high school, and that was all uncomfortable. But somehow in engineering it sort of reverted, and when I got to management consulting, I was like, deer in headlights. So that push was really, really powerful. I'd say the other piece that was hugely important in my management consulting sort of toolkit that I took away was being able to do that sort of, I call it dot connecting, but like seeing patterns and pieces and pulling them together and taking like learnings and transferring them over to different situations. And so as I was a consultant for 4 years. So over the course of my career, what I saw in my kind of latter half was that I was seeing things from my first half where I'm like, I can do things more efficiently or more effectively, and being able to apply it to different situations. And I think that comes into play a lot with my work now. I was fortunate to have been at several startups and see patterns there, but even across my current client set, there are things that I'm seeing where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm sort of connecting dots at all moments and trying to share learnings and apply them in different and new ways.
Do you think those two, dot connecting and kind of staying quiet, had any relationship? Like perhaps staying quiet a little bit more enabled you to connect the dots? I mean, do you think there's any correlation in that, or am I trying to force that?
I mean, the quietness and introversion are two different things, but I am both quiet and introverted. But as an introverted thinker, there definitely is some of the dot connecting was happening as I was processing.
Mm,
And so I mean, a third skill that I learned when I was in consulting was like how to pull out that processing. Like, how do I allow myself that introverted thinking to become more external? I was
mhm.
going to say extroverted, but it's not quite that.
Sure.
But I think there's definitely something there. Like I remember having to create a slide with some takeaways one time, and I was given like 5 minutes to do it. And I came up with something really fast. This was in my first year, and it was terrible. And I gave it to my manager, and he was like, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Oh, actually, lucky thing, like you have an extra 30 minutes because our meeting time got pushed back with the client." So I said, "Okay." So I sat there for next 30 minutes and then gave it to him. And he was like, "Wow, this is like 100 times better. What happened?" And I was like, I didn't know at the time, but now that you're saying it, I'm like, I'm just an introverted thinker. It takes me an extra beat to be able to kind of put these things together sometimes.
Yeah.
I've gotten better at like the iterations. Everything is like a skill. If you were practicing it on a regular basis, it gets easier.
Mm,
Over time it gets
yeah.
more straightforward, but at that time I was just learning it and trying to figure out how do I take this introverted thinking and extrapolate it.
Yeah, totally. No, thanks for sharing all that. And in the introverted thinking, you talked about the left-hand column, which is the name of your newsletter. Were you nervous to get things out? Like, was this left-hand column before it was a officially branded newsletter? Was there a shyness to express ideas into the world at the time, or just that's just how you were?
I think my left hand column, it feels very vulnerable,
Mm,
for us to share it. And so I definitely was kind of feeling like I was holding back. And there's it's funny, even as a kid, if people ask like, "Oh, what kind of music do you like?" or "What are you listening to on Spotify or Audible?" I'd always be a little bit shy, like worried about the judgment that would come with it. And I think as I get older, the more I am getting comfortable with and pushing myself, frankly, to get comfortable with sharing things that aren't normally my natural inclination. I think I do tend to be a better listener than I am put myself out there. It's much easier for me if someone else puts themselves out there first and then for me to meet them where they are. And I think maybe sometimes that's how I ended up in the world that I am, is that I'm listening much more and then meeting a client where they are. Um, so yeah, I think this left-hand column, it's a phrase that I actually stole from another executive at Gusto, Jalai Rizai, who now is CEO and founder of her own company called Mutiny in the marketing space. And she was just brilliant with all sorts of sayings and things. But she used to talk about like, hey, look, like what's in your left hand column, and it was so useful and beneficial for me to even be thinking about like what is even sitting in there right now, and then how do we pull that out? Because when we share what's sitting there, it's so much easier for us to address it and be able to either alleviate any fears or address any questions, or be able to really see the person more fully of what they're thinking and feeling.
I can totally understand the vulnerability and the notes that you keep on the left-hand side, and then what's going to happen when you do share. And then to your point, if you can listen and meet people where they are, and then it becomes easier to connect the dots because you're listening closer. So it's interesting to hear you just share it all and how you kind of think about showing up in your life.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I love that I learned from the CEO coach Matt Moshari is, anxiousness and excitement in in humans are kind of two sides of the same coin. Like physically, they manifest very similarly for us. Like you kind of get butterflies in your stomach, and your hands might get a little clammy. Your heart rate gets a little bit faster, whether you're excited or anxious. And the big difference is that these feelings that are about the future, is anxiousness is something where we feel we're thinking about all the worst case scenarios or all the negativity assigned to the future. And excitement is assigning a lot more positivity and optimism to it.
Mm.
And I, in my childhood, was quite the pessimist and anxious child. And so I think it's been an evolution and an intention around how do we bring that excitement and that optimism and that positivity into what comes with looking forward.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great reframe of the same emotion, right? The same feeling.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you've built this, I would say, way of being in life through these set of experiences, and you have found maybe your zone where you really enjoy showing up the most. And when I'm with you and I have certain conversations, it's so valuable and just love hearing you speak. Tell us a little bit more about where you've, let's just say, arrived in your present day, and how you're using this toolkit that you've built across all these different experiences to really support and serve others today.
Yeah. So, it's one thing I mentioned in my practice with my executive coaching clients who tend to be founder CEOs at startups, or executives at startups or later stage companies. And I'm with my clients tend to be very much meet you where you are. I tend to be a much more responsive coach and in the moment. And so for the first few years of my coaching practice, I was hesitant to write things down because I felt like then it's not so personalized and customized to the situation and the context for each of these clients. But what I started to notice that were trends. There were trends in the conversations that we would have and the things that I was sharing with them or observing from them. And I started to write them down. And I would say it's something I'm really excited to be working on right now is a series of guidebooks that are based off of these conversations and how I'm able to meet them now. But I think about my work with them in three pillars. I think about working with leaders in their individual leadership. So how am I showing up? What are some of the fundamentals that I'm investing in around my own well-being, around how I'm prioritizing and spending my time, and how I'm managing my emotions? The second pillar is around leading teams. And how do I think about being a good manager and developing my people and recognizing them and having the hard conversations with them and setting clear expectations and all kind of like that good fundamental people management work. And then the third pillar is around leading organizations. And especially for founder CEOs who are moving through a lot of change, oftentimes a lot of growth, we talk more and emphasize a good amount of our work also on how do I build a strategic organization? How do I build a great culture? How do I think about ensuring there's consistency between what we're saying and what we're doing? How do I think about scaling things at a much broader level than maybe I've needed to do in the past? And so with these three pillars, because I tend to be responsive, we don't go, okay, this is going to be the week of, or the month or quarter of one versus the other, but we pull in bits and pieces. And I tend to peel the onion and ask my clients, like, where are you at? And what are you focusing on? And there's a few different initial conversations that we'll have that help us align on goals. But my hope over time is that each of these three areas that I can help bring clarity and curiosity and confidence to my clients so that they can show up as stronger and more impactful leaders.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like your core foundations, right? That you're taking checking in with clients at all times, but it makes sense, the things that you're wanting to broaden their eyes to in their experience. My question for you, Jess, is, there's people who say they also work with founders and this and that. Like, how have you built your unique way, right? Like, what have you done as Jess? Right? You have these areas you like to focus on, but how do you kind of arrive at your, let's just say, philosophy for working with your clients that's like truly ownable to Jess, that like really no one else can do?
The thing that I bring to the table, I think, is what we as humans excel in, which is we each have our own set of experiences. And one of the things that's so beneficial about my set of experiences is it's blending the breadth of an engineering background with solid strategic and operational business experience, as well as in the trenches operating within the startup world, hyper growth, stagnation, all of the things, and pulling that together and using that alongside a brain that tends to be much more, analytical, structural, high level thinking down, and can kind of go between high level thinking and that detailed thinking, and pulling all of that together in a way that meets people exactly where they are. I think, with coaches, one of the interesting things is they're very structural coaches who will take you through a really well thought out, wonderful curriculum. And on the other end, you end up with a specific kind of leader. And then on the other end is where I tend to sit, which is a very responsive coach. So I'll ask, what's on your mind and what's in your way? And part of why I start there is because that's where their attention is and that's where their brain space is. And over time, what I start to be able to see is the surface presenting problem actually the problem? Or are there pieces and layers that are much deeper underneath that actually we can address and make sure that we're handling in a more systemic fashion and systemic approach?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I've always enjoyed, to your point, like your holistic nature, right? And probably why we connect so well in conversations is because you're thinking about things beyond just as is when problems arise, and you're thinking about how it connects to everything else. So, I mean, as a founder, when you're being hit from 14 directions a day, that reset or reframe is beyond helpful.
Yeah, I mean, founders and leaders in general, I mean, there's so much on your plates. There's so much context switching, and it's easy to kind of, it's a hard job. I think the part that we as leaders end up having as major challenges is how do we fit it all in, right? And how do we think about which things actually get our attention and get the most attention and the best parts of ourselves versus the things that kind of end up getting sort of haphazardly addressed or not even addressed at all. And how do we think about that intentionally? There's a saying that I really love that I think I stole from like a reality TV show, but it was someone who was commenting, there is no right or wrong or good or bad. It's just, are we intentional about it or are we not? And I think that intentionality is something that I really encourage my clients to bring to the table and how they're approaching themselves, their teams, and their organizations.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I love the intentional kind of focus there. And you're absolutely right. Just, as you were talking about you meeting founders where they're at, when you start working with a founder, when you ask these questions that are preliminary and to get to know them and understand where they're at, what is common or more common than not than what you're hearing from them? And as you work with somebody, let's say over a year or 3 years or 4 years, how do you see their evolution as leaders shift from the things that you're really working on them with?
Yeah, such a good question. I mean, I think there's kind of a parallel question to that, which is like what makes a great coaching client? Like when do you know you're ready for a coach, essentially? And I think that we now overuse this phrase. I was in the ed tech space in the past. It was my first startup. And so we were talking about growth mindset years ago. And nowadays it's sort of being used everywhere. But this idea that being open to learning and open to change and behavioral change, I think is something that's really important if someone's looking for a coach of I'm ready for that and actually want it. I think the best coaching clients are the ones who have been doing that their whole lives, whether they're reading books or podcasts or getting feedback from others. But they're the ones that they're most ready for it and will get the most out of the relationship with it. The second part of your question was more just what's the evolution after I've been working with a client for a long period of time. And I think in the early stages, there is much more of basics of learning, like introducing frameworks at the appropriate times of different tools that they can use. Over the maturity, there's a few dimensions. One is the nature of the roles are often changing. So I worked with one executive for the better part of a decade, and she went from a Series B company with 100 employees to it went through very well through an IPO and then continued to grow and was like a 3,000 person company. So just being a leader in one environment to the other requires a lot of transformation in how you communicate, how you show up, how you interact with your peers, how you upward manage, how you manage your team. So those were pieces that almost naturally were coming out of our discussions together because the challenges were continuously changing. For leaders who are going through periods of ups and downs or even stagnation, I had a leader last year, interestingly, he was saying, I love my company. I founded it. Like, this is a great place, but I'm kind of bored right now. Like, I brought in this amazing executive team. They're doing all the things. And I have stuff to do. It's not for lack of being not busy, but I'm not focusing on like stuff that I'm so excited about. And so when we dug into it, what we realized was he wasn't spending as much time with customers and clients as he used to, and he really wanted to get back to that. He was much more of an extroverted external personality. So he started going to more events, having more client meetings, and that helped to sustain. But the thing that really triggered this year is the industry he's in just like really went through a major change, and that sort of shifted his company to a different gear. And we're in year 3 together working. And so sometimes it's how do we sustain through periods? And that was last year's work. How do we sustain through a period where like, I know I still want to be here. I still want to be the CEO and founder of this company, but it's not that interesting, or it's not like getting me as excited and inspired. And that's a tough place to be when you're a CEO and founder. And as opposed to this year where it's like, whoo, industry changed, excitement's not the problem. There's like just more than I can handle coming at me. And it's the change in the role and the environment that we are working with to how do we keep him top of his game?
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. It sounds like you like working with self-aware leaders who have maybe the maturation to acknowledge where they're at so that you can help them because they're open-minded to receiving that support and help. Is that fair?
Yeah, they don't need to be mature, but the self-awareness is helpful. And here's why. Coaches are only as good as you are self-aware as a client. Because if you come to the table and you talk to your coach and you're like, oh, here's my delusional version of what's happening, the coach will work with you on that body of evidence that you're coming up with and the version of the world that you believe to be true. And so what you bring back into your organization, into your team, is going to be based off of your understanding the story you're telling yourself. So the more likely that story is accurate, the easier it is for your coach to be able to do good work with you and effective work with you. And it's a big reason why I encourage, I don't require, some coaches do require this for exactly this reason, but I encourage doing a 360 when I work with clients, because then it allows me to even understand like, hey, we've been working together for a while. I've heard your version of it. What's your team's version of this, right? And how similarly aligned are they? And I find for most of my clients, because there is this matching process that we're doing, they're spot on. What they're presenting and what they believe to be true and what their teams are perceiving of them are much more consistent. And so that makes our work together, that makes it easier for me because I'm like, good, like what you think you're doing, you're actually getting done.
I mean, to your point, you're right. Maybe that needs to be mature, but the self-awareness enables the work to be done and you to be able to, do your job most effectively. But I really like what you said about that one founder who's gone through, you're in year 3, but he's gone through these evolutions and transitions and learning how to find his energy within the business again, and what makes him come alive. So completely understand that. Jess, for you as a coach, right? Like how long have you been doing this, just for audience's sake?
Yeah, this is year 7 for me.
Okay. From when you first started, right, to now, where do you think you've grown the most in your own journey as a coach?
Yeah. A few things. I think there's like the core fundamentals of just like coaching tools. Like certainly that has been a journey in itself. I think my listening skills continue to grow with every single year, and it's something that I continue to hone as much as I can. I think maybe the biggest change that I've made is I used to think that I needed to come with many more answers for my clients, especially because I tend to have this blend between coaching and advising, and especially for the clients that I have that are people leaders. As a former people leader, there are some places where we do talk about as more of a thought partnership and advisory situation. But because my clients have expanded in beyond the people leader and CEO sort of set, I now work with heads of product, heads of engineering, go-to-market leaders. And in those cases, a lot of times I don't know exactly best practice, or I don't have specific answers. And so I think the ability to actually coach people in those situations has really evolved as well, and has really expanded my repertoire too. I think the biggest impact to my clients that I've noticed is over the years, I've had clients that have, focused a lot in the early days of only on what was going on at work. And the other evolution is like that leader I just mentioned, he's becoming a father this year. He got married last year. And so we talk about things of like, how does not just about his role as a CEO, but how is he showing up as a husband? How he's thinking about showing up as a father and balancing his founder or CEO role alongside fatherhood. One of my clients, her mother was going through stage 4 cancer. And for the better part of a year, we were figuring out, how do you show up for your family in that moment? And how do you also show up, and by moment, a long moment, because it was a year, how do you also show up in the workplace, especially as your heart might be grieving? And her mother did pass away. And so we had discussions about the grieving process alongside being an executive and not really feeling like there's the space and time for that. And so I think that's the other piece that's been an evolution for me as a coach. Of it really is expansive, that when people think about executive coaching, sometimes it's about just this one piece of my life. But what I've noticed, to your point about like the holistic approach that I try to take with clients, is that they really bring all the things that are top of mind and in their way for them, and how to think about, how do I embrace certain pieces of it? Where do I try to put things aside? Where do I prioritize? And how do I show up as a person in these moments?
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, from what you're saying is, I mean, you've grown as like, I mean, you've been hit from so many sides, because you realize you're not just handling the workplace issues, you're handling like the emotional at home parts of individuals, and how what's the interconnection between how you show up in both and become the best leader through navigating those moments. And I mean, it's critical role to play in someone's life, and to be empathetic and to be understanding, and help provide a toolkit for those on that path is essential. It sounds like you really show up with care, right, for those people who need the support in different ways.
Yeah. I think that has definitely been an evolution. There's one of the like kind of strengths finders personality test things is the Myers-Briggs, and it's used a lot in Myers-Briggs type indicator, or MBTI, and it's used a lot in management consulting. And so I took it early in my career, and I was what's called my letters are INTJ, and the T is the options are thinker or feeler. And feelers tend to be really empathetic. Thinkers tend to be more kind of logical and straight and narrow. And I am a very strong T. And I will say that has been an evolution over my journey, as well as you ask, as over my coaching journey, to really exercise and build the muscles around being an F alongside that, like logical T thinking part, with that feeling empathetic, understand the situation. And one of the first kind of HR moments that I had in my career, I still look back on, and I feel really guilty for it. But there was an employee who was going through cancer, and I had somebody on my team who was going like above and beyond with her kind of care for him, and going to visit him at home, and collecting all sorts of things from other employees, but to the detriment of like her responsibilities in the workplace. And I remember having a moment where I like essentially was like, hey, you got to cut back on the caring part of this, the empathy, that, because it was like, it was so much. It was kind of sacrificing what she was doing in the workplace. And I remember, I still can see the expression on her face where she was just like so hurt, because she was like 100% F. And I was like still 100% T, and kind of like, come on, get back over here. And I wish I had been able to kind of bring what I now approach in my work, which is that balance of how do you strike that kind of that mix between having that empathy and that care, which I think is what made the employee experience so amazing for that organization, was the empathy and care that she brought, but balanced with, okay, there's still other pieces that still need to be happening right now.
Yeah, good awareness for you, and good anecdote to share for sure. And lesson you'll never forget. But yeah, it sounds so important, and I appreciate you articulating all of that. What's ahead for just the coach of leaders? What's like, what do you see for you as you continue down this journey?
Yeah, what's funny is that at every moment in my career, I've sort of, if you look back, it's sort of, there's been such zigzags that it's hard to anticipate. But for me, what I love is the one-on-one relationships with clients. So what I see going forward is are more of those, and being able to continue to develop as a coach and advisor. One of the things I love is learning, both learning to be able to share with my clients, but learning from them as well. And I think the dot connecting part of my brain just wants to be able to have more of those connections happening. And so the guidebooks are one piece of that. I hope to eventually be able to move that into courses or a book. But I think that being able to share as much as possible is one of the things that I am really excited for.
And when you say share, you talked about the guidebooks, like share and make that tangible in ways, you're sharing now in certain ways. Like, how do you want to be sharing in ways next few years that would like be really true to you that maybe you're not fully today?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make promises because I think there's still things to be figured out. But my hope is to continue to be sharing the things that I'm learning. I've been doing that on LinkedIn so far for the better part of the last year, and continuing to talk with others. I just actually got off of a webinar this morning that had hundreds of participants, and we were talking about some of the hard learnings that come with employee terminations. And so I think just continuing to take that left-hand column and move it into more of an open and public forum is something that I'm excited to do. It's one of those things right now. There is quite a bit of content that's out there, but I really do strongly believe like we're at a turning point in the way that we lead and the way that we show up for our people. And the more that we can kind of raise is it the tide that raises all boats? The more that we can serve as being part of that tide and lifting all of us to better and more impactful leadership, the more excited I get about the work I get to do and the work that I'm going to do.
Thank you for sharing all that work. I think the world is excited to see your humanity or your left-hand column brought to life a little bit more, and the experiences that you bring. You're right, there's a lot of content on all the things that you do out in the world, but I think the anecdotes, the breadth and depth of experience, how you are connecting things across, that is unique, right? You're not just a coach, you're a coach in all the other parts of you. And it's been fun watching you share and show up on this and share how it all connects back to kindergarten and getting held back a little bit. But I appreciate the time today. It's been wonderful.
Likewise, Brian. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Is there, before we wrap, is there anything I didn't ask you that you just want to add an anecdote in at the end, or anything I didn't cover? You're like, it would be really good to finish on that note.
I this speaks to the title of my newsletter, the left-hand column. But one of my clients currently, I actually am coaching all the individual leaders one-on-one, and then we have group sessions together. And it's become part of their company vocabulary to talk about what's in their left-hand column. And they are so, their communication lines are so enviable, I would say, for many organizations, because they are able to kind of bring up and address the challenges that are happening on a regular basis. And so I would encourage everybody to be thinking more about, how do I share my left-hand column? How do I get that out there in a way that allows me to feel more closely connected and more, more closely communicating with those around me? Yeah,
I mean, it's your impact that you're having on an organization, right, being reflected back to you, which is, I'm sure, such a good feeling.
It really is. It's showing that the impact of the work is actually taking root.
Absolutely. Well, Jess, thanks for coming on. Where can people find you, reach out to you?
Yes, my website, jessyuen.com, or on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess.
Thanks, Brian. Take care.
Thank you for joining me on the One Away Show. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, please leave a review and follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Have a one away moment you'd like to share? Follow me on Twitter or Instagram at BrianWish_, or reach out to me on LinkedIn and tell me about the moment that altered your life. The One Away Show is produced by Arcbound, a company dedicated to helping entrepreneurs, experts, and visionaries launch authentic personal brands. From message development to podcast production, social media content generation, and book writing, we work with you to create your arc. Head to arcbound.com to learn more. Thank you for listening, and please join me next time on The One Away Show.